Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you all today to talk about the art and nuance of trust-based philanthropy. I'm Phil Lee. I'm with the Robert Sterling Clark Foundation here in New York City. We are place-based funders that invest in people, and we do that by investing in organizations that provide leadership development opportunities. I'm here with one of our nonprofit partners, the Institute for Nonprofit Practice, and I'll let our guests introduce themselves.
Thanks, Phil. Hi, I'm Yolanda Cointreau. I'm the president and CEO of the Institute for Nonprofit Practice, and we are a leadership development and capacity building organization that's scaling nationally with a site here in New York City, focused on bringing the skills, networks, and resources to social impact leaders that they need in order to create a more equitable future for all.
Thank you, Yolanda. My name is Kevin Cummings. I'm the Executive Director in New York for the Institute for Nonprofit Practice. New York represents our newest site, so we're really excited to have this growth in this new space and looking to grow our program nationally as well.
And we're all excited to be able to talk with you today about trust-based philanthropy, the ideas behind it, and how it gets operationalized, and what that experience is like for a nonprofit partner. And so today, that's what we'll have a chance to explore together. Trust-based philanthropy is really a set of practices, there are 6 of them, that really are trying to acknowledge and address the power dynamic that's inherent in any funder-grantee relationship. And the desire is to really kind of flatten some of that and really acknowledge that that power dynamic exists. And one of the things that we aspire to do is really try to become better partners and try to make the relationship more equal in the way that we do our work. One of the aspects of trust-based philanthropy is streamlining and simplifying paperwork. And one of the aspects of that we do in our work is using something called a chat, which is an acronym that stands for the Check-in Analysis Tool. So in lieu of a written report annually, we have a conversation with a grantee partner and really have a chance to explore and learn what's been happening, what the challenges have been, and how things are looking for the year to come. And so it's a nice way to, one, build relationship, but also to get deeper into some of the work that's being done. Interestingly, most years it's always been done in person, right? But unfortunately with COVID, that has changed things. And so all of our chats were virtual, and we used Zoom as the technology to do that. We typically have recorded them, and the idea behind that is so that it's for internal use for us as a foundation, but we have external evaluators that listen for themes and trends and ideas that are embodied in the chats. So when this was actually recorded earlier this year, we had no idea that it would become a more public facing thing that you'll see a little bit of today. The idea is really that we'll take advantage of this unusual moment to share some of the video and some of the excerpts from that chat that I had with the Institute for Nonprofit Practice. And they've graciously agreed to let this be shown in a more public setting. So with that, we are going to show parts of that chat, and you'll see different elements of the practices of trust-based unfold in that, and then we'll come back and share a little bit more of reflection after we've seen it too, to talk about what that experience was like. As you think about this past year and you reflect on kind of this COVID year, if you will, I guess what, as an organization, kind of are the things that you learned or you discovered, and both just overall as an organization and then secondarily through your leadership development work? And I know almost everything is leadership development, so for you, they're pretty much one and the same, but for some other organizations, it's not always the case.
I think, just reflecting on this year, interestingly, as you say year, it's been a year, I've been here a year as well. And so it's been major learning and growth, not even just for for myself, but also for the organization as well. Having seen IMP grow from its Community Fellows Program inaugural class that was in January of 2020, I joined in April of that year, to now doubling our footprint in New York City has just been not only exciting, but a proud moment, particularly given the environment and the around us and the needs of leaders. And that's another thing that I think we've learned too, is just the fact that leaders were looking for our programs. And just as I was speaking about myself and the space that you create and valuing that, I think IMP, the feedback we've gotten from our students is that we really have been able to allow them to create a space and contribute to a space, facilitate a space, a brave space as we call it, for leaders to be able to put on new learnings, to be able to test, maybe even sanity check the things that they're doing, but also to be able to think constructively about how they want to grow impact in their respective, in the social impact sector, but in their respective impact areas. As you can imagine, those needs have been both like structural and organizational, but also because of the climate. So I think, you know, for our Black, Indigenous people, those who identify as Black, Indigenous people of color and women, we really have seen the fact that they valued that space. Our attendance has actually been great too, which was something that I was, I mean, I shouldn't say in front of y'all, I was concerned about. I was like working to make sure that our students would, you know, in a new market with new commitments, amidst new challenges, there were a lot of things moving for a lot of our leaders. Their organizations were changing, their family situations were changing, their living situations were changing. But we actually have above 87% attendance. I actually think it's above 90. In terms of growing, and Yolanda will actually speak a little bit to some of the larger sort of national pieces because she has a greater perspective for it. But, you know, we've been invited to apply for a large multi-year gift from the foundation. And, you know, we feel that that's an indicator of our growth and sort of our situation in this market. We're really excited about that.
But if I could just like pause there for a sec, Kevin, if that's all right.
Sure.
Just to say, you know, Phil, you've been an advisor to me over the last couple years, and you know, we've been working to get in the door there for so long, and so they just invited us to apply, and despite everything we've had to navigate with them and talk with them about, the outcome in the end has been really positive. So I just want to thank you for helping me think that all through along the way. Yeah.
No, you don't need to thank me. You should thank yourselves and the great work that you do, right? That is what's kind of being honored in. And so I'm delighted for you. So congratulations on that. It's just a reflection, I think, as I think about it and think about you as you were just starting the program, right? And to your point, Kevin, it's like, here we are, year one, or now we're like year two, right? But it's, you started in a really challenging moment, right? Or a time where being new and being unknown in a place is incredibly challenging. And just to see, and I'll just sort of speak from my own personal view, it's like to see the people who are part of your cohorts and the people who are participating and just the way that they engage. And thank you for inviting me to speak earlier. But you know, it's a testament to kind of the way that you have partnered and done outreach and have kind of shared what you're doing with a larger population.
Thanks for that. You know, we talk about like using our values around community organizing to scale, really having it be like from the ground up and be invited in and not insert ourselves. And some of how what we've learned through New York that we hope to carry forward into other cities is what was a massive kind of support and catalyst for us was all the relationship building we did at the onset before we hit go. And so in fact, you suggested to me and Aviva, like, you should talk to this woman, Erica. And then Erica suggested to us that we should talk to this guy, Kevin. And then, you know, and then the faculty came around. And so it really was like, you know, kind of community organizing at its best, like asking people if this was needed, understanding if we could do something that was impactful and how, getting feedback on how the how could be different in New York than in any other place, and then getting people behind it who wanted to take this and run with it. And I'll just say, Phil, like I'm sure you have experienced this also at like an incredible level, given that you do the similar work on the ground, not just funding it. But I mean, we had folks who were just so underwater with everything that was happening, like to the point of, you know, I mean, severe emotional distress. Like in a lot of ways. Our faculty became like counselors, and I mean, it was just like nothing any of us have ever seen before. And to be in New York at that time, especially New York, I mean, it was just like so humbling. And so everybody asked us like, oh my gosh, you were in New York, you launched in 2020 in New York City. And it was like, yeah, it sounds crazy, but like, so glad we did, because I mean, we were immediately needed. And so anyway, it's been a really powerful year of a lot of learning and reflection. So.
But you were talking about attendance early on, and you're like, you were so happy that the numbers are high. But honestly, hopefully, if they were really low, you would have just gone and told us too. And that's part of the learning, right? It's sort of like, hey, you just shared like the challenges that all these your participants are facing. And so if you told me that was like 40%, that's okay, right? And I think that's the whole thing with us is like, share with us what's going on. Like if the outreach didn't meet what you were looking to do and you're looking for new ways to do that, hopefully we can be partners in helping you think about that, as opposed to like, ooh, that's 5 demerits, but and so hopefully, I know it's a slightly different frame, but I would just sort of say that, like, to the extent that we can be helpful, like if you're part of our family or part of this community of kind of grantees, like we want you to be successful. So how can we kind of put on our hat with our own understanding of New York and the landscape? What can we do to help you and to help others, right? I think the more that we have accomplished and talented leaders who can carry the city forward, the better off we all are, right? And so, so I just kind of put that out there as just a comment. If you think about this past year, like how did unrestricted funding, whether it was from us or for others, kind of affect your organization and the health of it and the ability to kind of move forward? And then our secondary question would be like, and how, if at all, was the professional development award deployed or used in that passion?
Great, Kevin, maybe I could take the first part, you could take the second part. Does that work?
Absolutely. Yeah, that works.
Okay. So on the first part, I would say, increasingly we're seeing a trend, especially because of COVID, that folks are they're moving faster on grant making, have less structure and processes that get in the way, and they're giving general operating grants or converting their gen op grants or converting restricted grants into gen op grants, at least over this last year. I think for us, it's a game changer, because what it does is it's not just like emblematic of you trust us to make good business decisions for our organization based on whatever we might be facing in the moment, which has been obviously so uncertain and different every day and complex. But it's also meant that, when we needed to pivot from in-person to virtual, and we didn't have all of these like really rigid program grants that required us to reach out to 25 different funders to say we're going to move things slightly differently, or we're going to, serve less people in one area or more in another area or whatever. It just gave us like a huge amount of flexibility. And I think we are at the intersection. You probably experienced this with a number of your grantees because of what you do. But the fact that like federal leadership was failing, COVID and an economic crisis hit, and there was a racial reckoning kind of all at the same time. We were thrust into the center of what could be a solution. And so it's like we've been sitting there saying, hey, if folks could just invest in us, we actually could do some great things for the sector. But I don't think what that meant kind of really resonated for people until now. And so having some gen op grants to build from and say, look, these funders trust us, but between, this handful of general operating funds, we were able to move some things around and go. And I'll just tell you, like, the end result has been that looking at next year, so we're about a $3.4 million budget right now, through, kind of waiting on staff hires and pushing really hard on fundraising this year. We're going to have a surplus at the end of the year that's more than we had anticipated, which we're really proud of. And it's unrestricted money, so we can roll it over into next year. And next year, we're asking our board to vote on a budget that's double this size. So right now, our budget proposal to the board is about 6 million. So they may say no, but we have a really good case. And so we'll see. I don't know. Our team has done a lot of work on the analysis of it, but the goals are huge in the coming year. And, it's because we had the flexibility. I remember being on the CEP panel, and Rashad Robinson had said, like, he wouldn't have been able to like grow Color of Change the way he did if people didn't give him general operating money, because he could just respond to like build where needed, hire what's needed. And I feel like I've had a little bit more of that liberty over the last 2 years than I've ever had as a CEO, and as a result, the team. So
what are some practices around racial equity that you've kind of encountered or dealt with or used that might be helpful for us is to see kind of your work with us or the way that we engage and work with others, and always trying to learn and understand kind of what that might be. And we're still in our own very early kind of learning about so much of this work. So really trying to kind of refine and learn and tap minds that have seen many things beyond what we have done. So if you got things that.
Yeah, I mean, if I were to put in a word, right, I think it's modeling. I think all a grantee can ask is to continue sharing your platform and resources with us in every way possible. And so I want to thank you for doing that, and just ask you to continue doing that. I think you guys have modeled, trust-based philanthropy is an approach and a solution to the question you asked. And I think that you guys have just done a great job of setting the bar, but also creating the space for it, particularly amongst other leaders. The other thing I would say too is, not to underestimate grantee discomfort with the lack of process. The communication is helpful. Like I definitely know that for you saw that me asking all those emails, sending those emails, like, wait, what's the questions? It's literally, I'm reacting, but I appreciate you managing that. I regret if it caused any upset, but it was, just trying to make sure that we're aligned. So
when we first started talking, and you right away, I mean, Aviva and I were like, oh my gosh, this model is like going to help us achieve racial equity in the grantee and funder relationship. All grantees have to know about it so that they could maybe help funders when asked for feedback to consider it. In all seriousness, we've been talking about how, like, we're building like a codified racial equity theory of change and weaving it into our whole organizational structure. And it's good practice, and we want to have something to continue to model the way for other organizations. But we also say, like, we didn't have to write racial equity into everything we did, because we were built for that, because our practices are that, because that was what we were trying to disrupt from our founding. And I feel like that's what you put into place from, the moment you all pivoted with your leadership. It was a different way of grant making that is a practice to level the power dynamic. So keep doing what you're doing is the moral of the story.
We just watched an excerpt of the chat, and it was interesting to go back to April of this year when we actually originally taped it. But as we three had a chance to sort of look at it, it brought back some memories and some feelings about what that experience was like. And so just wanted to turn to you and sort of see kind of what came up for you as you were watching this.
Yeah, I think for me, it was like we were having a conversation with a real partner and friend in the work. And it's a very different experience than we've had with a lot of our funding partners in terms of, reporting back on what the year was like and how we would do that. What I saw in the video was, vulnerability and also conversation that reflected a relationship between us that was more, honest. You invited us at one point in the video to say what wasn't going well, and I think you framed it as, oh, you know, Kevin had talked about the attendance piece and that was a surprise, and you said, but if it's okay, if it wasn't a success, that's okay. You could tell me. And in the moment, I remember really feeling invited to name anything that we were challenged by, to talk about the struggles that our students were having. You know, they weren't, it was a very difficult and challenging year, and I felt like we could tell you that. And actually that made our relationship going forward also stronger as we think about what we're building together for New York from here. So I don't know for you what stood out.
I think in the end, what I would say as well happened is that I actually kind of felt like I was leading the conversation. And I think in that way, it helps to add value to the work that we're doing when we're being able to speak honestly about the types of impacts we're having, the types of challenges we're having as well. I really felt that the conversation was inviting me to fill in those spaces. Oftentimes when we tell stories, even though we know that stories have arcs to them, we tell these stories that sometimes can be flat about things are going well, and I think the opportunity for us to actually talk about the real work really gave visibility to the fact that that's what we focus on, is really working with leaders. It's really personal work in a very direct way. It's community work, and so I felt very valued in that space, and I didn't expect that.
Yeah.
What did you expect?
I think my expectations were that we would need to sit with the funder and be able to tell the great stories about all the amazing things that we were able to do, and to almost leave out the things we're learning. Right? Oftentimes those challenges are the places you're learning, and I don't know if even in my own experience I've always had the opportunity or the space to tell that part of the story. It's really like, what are you doing well? And I think when we have the opportunity to sit with the funder who's building relationship and enables us to be able to tell that entire piece of it about the places where we struggled and where we might want to learn or adapt, I actually just think it's a powerful it's a powerful dynamic to have. I actually think it actually is defining a partnership as opposed to a funder, the traditional funder relationship where it doesn't really feel that way.
You were all both really forthcoming in sharing this. Like, how does that get set up in a way that you are comfortable to share that kind of those ideas or things that may or may not have gone the way that you had anticipated?
I think for me, having gotten to know you and the team over time, and really seeing a lot of different moments of evidence of, we want to help you, we want to partner with you, we want to put your work first, we want to help you meet people and network. I mean, there were so many things outside of the actual funding. And so, you know, it didn't feel just like we're having a exchange around an investment. You know, the run up to it was you really saying, no, we work from this place of trust. We have practices around trust. If they're broken, tell us. I mean, you were asking for feedback all along the way as we got to know you all. And coming to our programs and watching our work unfold, even though you were incredibly busy, like, you showed up for moments to see us in action and to give us, you know, support. And I think, you know, those things for me were like the runway to getting to the chat and feeling like, oh, we can just talk to Phil and tell him, I mean, you're the CEO of a foundation. We don't get a chance to talk to a lot of CEOs of foundations directly. But, you know, you're coming to us saying like, so tell me what's going on and what's been hard and what's been going well, and here's what's happening on our end, and what do you think about our practices? What can we do better? And so it wasn't us reporting a bunch of data to you on all the goals we met and that was it, and it was really transactional. It was us together talking about, wow, this has been like an exceptionally hard year. I wouldn't have been able to write about that in a report. Like, we needed to talk about what we've been through as human beings and as organizations, and how we lifted each other up through a really tough year. And I think that came from a dialogue, but it was one that, you know, you were building up to through all of your practices along the way, and being really transparent with us when it wasn't the right time for funding. You told us that when, you didn't just tell us it wasn't the right time. You told us this is what needs to happen in order for us to consider you. You were like very clear and transparent about that. And so we weren't also like wondering, like, does Robert Sterling Clark think we're a potential partner, valuable partner to them or not? Or are we, you had integrity in the process. But I don't think that's just because that's who you are. It's like literally built into the operation of trust-based philanthropy. It's the practice. And that's been really valuable for us to see in action.
I would say the same thing as well. It didn't feel transactional. And I think that it's easy to think about funding as a transaction. Where it's like, I'll tell you the story, we get the funding. And I think the fact that I had met leadership from Robert Sterling Clark Foundation before that day. Like I feel like I know people here and they actually care about the work. I think those things allowed there to be a conversation, right? So it did not feel performative. It didn't feel transactional. We felt like we were continuing a conversation that I may be adding a bit more color, or had the opportunity to add a bit more color to invite questions. And again, not to say that I was leading the conversation, but I actually felt like I was participating in it equally, and providing information, creating curiosity and answering questions, which I think is what a dialogue is and what it looks like. And so I think, for those reasons, in addition to what Yolanda said, that's why I felt like that conversation was really like a successful practice.
I think there's a richness and texture that comes through a conversation and through a relationship that you can't convey on paper, to your point. Like, how do you talk about or describe the trauma or angst or the severity of what people were going through during COVID or any other time, right? On a sheet of paper, right? And I think the beauty of kind of conversation is that, like, if there's something that, and this is just me, I want to go down this little track because I'm really curious about it. That opportunity is there, right? But if there's a comment on a page that's there, then there's a period, and then on to the next idea. There's not a chance to explore that or learn more about what that actually meant, or to delve more deeply to catch the texture behind it. And so there's so much that we learn from our grantees as part of this. Like, I think you were talking about being able to share and what you're learning, and that's exactly the same for us. It's really, we come with it from a learning stance. And we're not the ones on the ground, we're not the ones working in community, we're the ones who are a step further back. And so our ability to learn and glean from you what's happening and to perhaps see trends or themes, and that's what our external evaluators are really listening for, is like, this is what's going on. I would also say that, and this is just a recent chat that I had with a brand new ED who is kind of new to trust-based approach to this work. And so it was very enlightening in a way that it reminded me of things that we don't experience a lot anymore. And so it was a really good reminder of what conversations can be like. It was really more of this classic dog and pony or pitch to us about why we should continue funding them. And hopefully, foundations like us and others who do trust-based work can be partners in thinking about, like, well, let's problem solve together, right?
Yeah. Well, we didn't see these parts in the clips from our chat, but I remember one feeling, walking away from it, both of us were like, that was so awesome. And so, I was trained as a social worker, and in social work school and in therapy, you learn like an assessment is an intervention, right? And so I think there's like a parallel experience here that actually how you set up reporting and talking with each other about the work that's being done in an organization actually supports the organization. So not only did we feel, and the reason why we felt great wasn't just because you were nice. You were asking really meaningful questions because you got the chance to dig deeper. So it wasn't these like paragraphs that we were reporting on that were, maybe data full, but didn't have a lot of context to it. But also you were finding opportunities where you could be supportive or give us like feedback right on the spot. And, you know, I remember us talking about our national aspirations and the different cities that we're looking at. And you were helping us think about how to advance our work around the country, and also who we could be talking with in New York to expand our work here. And those kinds of things you don't get in that technical exchange. But I remember you saying, like, isn't this a better job for program officers? And I was like, totally. I see them like drowning in reports and reading reports and kind of, you know, in this position of almost like policing. But that's not why they got into the work. They got into the work because they care about advancing social change and they care about people. And we've removed the people from the whole equation. And I think what the practices of this are really fundamentally putting in are like, put the people back in the center, put the relationships back in the center, talk to each other. And like, you know, the added benefit is we're all a lot happier and connected and more impactful when we walk away from these conversations, right? So we got into some systemic patterns that have really just created oppressive and damaging conditions for funder-grantee relations that actually then created a code of secrecy or a performative nature to it. And this is like really eliminating that. I will say, and we've talked about, like, it's also uncomfortable because no one does this, right? So you talked about that ED. I'm sure that ED is like, do you really want me to be honest with you? Like, do you really want me to not come with my whole slide deck and, you know, my big pitch? And like, you really do. But I think being really explicit about why you do and how you do your work, like, that helps the grantee understand, like, you know, the power in this kind of an experience, and to, you know, also trust the experience. Like, I really could come to that as a leader in the work, and I can make a joke about, like, oh gosh, I hope my board does approve this budget I'm telling Phil about, because that will be really embarrassing if I have to come back to you and be like, didn't go so well. But of course they did, and I think I wouldn't have been able to say that, you know, in typical circumstances, or certainly not write in a report that something is like still up in the air. But you should know it's up in the air, because that's part of what you're thinking about in terms of how you might help us in the next year. You want to know, like, what are you shooting for? Can I help you with what you're shooting for? And it matters. To have that conversation. Those aren't usually questions in a, you know, final report.
I was going to say, what you made me think about in your comment as well is about, IMP talks a lot about brave space and places where, and maybe even sometimes shifting power, redefining power. And I thought about the brave space piece because I think that we try to create a brave space for the leaders that we work with, a place where people can be vulnerable, where there's trust and honesty. And I think that what your organization does is create a brave space for leaders to do the same thing in philanthropy. And I think it's interesting because when you're doing that, you're pushing against and redefining what used to be a different type of power paradigm or kind of setup. And I think that requires intention. It requires awareness, and I think it actually requires a learning posture. And I think that that's different. And the fact that as partners, both groups can be in the same space learning and saying, like, hey, what's happening for you? What do you think? I just think that's a powerful model for, like, us to be able to say, you know, yeah, we want you guys to work in a brave space, but we actually get an opportunity to practice in one, in a different partnership we have. For me, it's been a powerful experience, and I know for IMP as well. It's just been great because we've celebrated that. Like, we talk about it a lot. We gloat or celebrate it a lot.
That's a strong word.
Yeah, right. But, you know, but I mean, we're really proud of it. You know, with jokes aside, but we're really proud of that. And I think as we think about the leaders that we're working with, you know, we're excited to be able to kind of say, like, you know what, there are examples of leaders in the space and funding that operate this way. and that what we're telling you isn't just because it sounds good. Like this is actually, there's a place to practice this and be successful at it. So I just wanted to add that.
And you've been a resource for that, Phil. I mean, I remember you and Lisa came and actually met with our leaders to talk about trust-based philanthropy. And I know for all of the leaders who were in that room hearing about these practices, there was like a sigh of relief and a glimmer of like optimism and potential opportunity for what relationships could look like more broadly with funders, because we're all yearning for that on both sides. But I think as leaders who are training other leaders on the nonprofit and social impact side, them knowing that these practices can exist and do exist and they're growing actually gives them the opportunity to help advance them as well from their seat. Because sometimes funders do ask for feedback, and it's hard to be brave and courageous and actually give them that feedback. But you're giving us a context and the opportunity, one, to say, this is a credible practice, and other funders are asking for feedback and they don't hold it against us. In fact, it's best practice. And I think that's really powerful, because I think both nonprofits and philanthropists can move these practices forward together. And I mean, before we really knew you, we were like, oh gosh, like how will we know if the grant we're submitting is okay, because they're allowing us to submit any grant we've ever written? Is it the one they want? Like, that was uncomfortable for us. How will we know what the questions are in the chat? And like, will we address the things that Phil needs to hear in order to imagine continuing to invest in us? So there's also some like learning that the grantee in this kind of practice also needs to do our practice, maybe through transparency, like as you do, around here's what we're doing and why. That'll help bring that pressure down for folks. And you allowed us to give you that feedback when Kevin was like, I'm really sorry I've been bothering you about the questions. But it's like, because we've never just shown up for a conversation with a funder. It's amazing. And now that we had the experience, we're like, we really could just show up for this conversation with Phil. But in advance of it, we were like, what if we do it wrong? And that's just like the reality of what grantees experience generally. So,
right. Well, I think that's great learning for us as an institution too, right? The last thing we definitely want to do is like put you on edge and be anxious about a conversation with us when we think the questions are pretty straightforward and they're not a gotcha type thing. The idea is just like, these things are designed to spur conversation. That one of the principles is like transparency and clarity, and we didn't do that, right? Or it was blurred in a way, and so, or somewhat opaque in nature. And so like, that's good feedback for us to think about, like how we can be better at that in the future, and on other fronts too. But I think it often gets conflated, and so I'll just sort of float this out there, but a lot of people, when they hear trust-based philanthropy or trust and things like that, they think of trust for friendship and trust for likability. And that's actually not what the underlying premise is. It's trust for action or trust for impact, right? We believe that you are going to do what you say you're going to do, right? And that's where the trust comes from. It's a balancing act, right? Because we do want to be partners, right? We have a particular role in kind of these relationships, is like we have ability to provide resources, but also often have a purview of like what else is happening in the sector, like more of a bird's eye, or these are trends that we're seeing and wanting to share that. I think that's part of what our board is. Like, we've taken all the time and energy to sort of say, here are these folks that we really believe in and are doing important work. Let's do everything that we can do to help ensure that they're successful in what they're trying to do and trying to accomplish. And so I think for us, it really comes down to that heart of what all this is. I think I come from kind of Wall Street in the first half of my career, so ROI, return on investment, is really one of the metrics that gets used. But the invitation that I have for all of us right now is return on relationship. which is what we usually use as our marker and indicator of like how well are we doing as a funder and how good a partner are we with you.
Yeah. Well, I would say on our end, we're more committed and invested in making this relationship impactful because of how you set it up, right? Because there's trust in us, we feel like a deep commitment and obligation to show up and to do it well. And that's, you know, with anyone that you have a strong relationship with and a true partnership with in social change work, you're in it together. You want to show up for each other. And I think this is what the practices really elicit. And, you know, with other funders where maybe that trust isn't there, the practices are really bureaucratic, where you feel like you're just doing what they want you to do or you don't get the funding. Actually, I think, you know, you could argue in a lot of those cases the impact is diminished.
I appreciate you defining what that trust looks like, because I think the operant word I've heard from you and Yolanda and I felt in our conversation was responsibility. If we're talking about helping leaders and creating system change, that requires this commitment and responsibility to do that. And we feel that the partnership, the relationship we have with you helps to support our ability to do that. Our ability to be flexible when we're asking leaders, what do you need right now during a pandemic, that no one is able to chart or predict. Folks are actively adapting as opposed to transitioning. Like, we don't know the next fixed point. And so we felt that in the room with our leaders. And being able to have support that enables us to be flexible, to allow them to be flexible and agile, really the word, I think is important. So we do feel a tremendous sense of responsibility to be able to do that work in the communities that we're serving.
Wow, thank you for that conversation. I think watching the chat together was really enlightening for me and for us as an institution, right? We typically don't have a chance to sit down with our grantee partners and watch it together and sort of reflect on kind of what we're seeing. And so I would say that we take away much learning and additional knowledge about like what's happening through the conversation that we have today. So thank you so much for that. I'm just wondering if you have any closing reflections.
Similar, just feeling a lot of gratitude, both to you for bringing these practices forward to other philanthropists. I think it's really brought out the best in us, and I hope that these practices continue to expand around the country, and whatever we can do to support nonprofit leaders in learning about these practices and engaging in relationship in this way with funders, we are excited to also promote the work from our end. So thanks for having us.
No, absolutely. Thank you for allowing us to share about our experience with these chats and the trust-based philanthropy. I would also say, as a new executive director and as a new program in New York, it's been a great opportunity to be able to learn and practice in this way. With you and to be able to learn how this work can help to drive what we want to do, not only in the communities that we're serving, but also nationally as well. So again, really appreciate this platform and this opportunity to have a conversation.
No, well, thank you for the work that you're doing and the impact you're having across New York. It's a real privilege for us to be a partner with you in the good work that you're doing. Today has been really an interesting moment for us to learn more about the Institute for Nonprofit Practice, but also to share more about the chat. And the chat is really one aspect of one of the practices of trust-based philanthropy, which is really about simplifying and streamlining the process. So this verbal reporting system is one aspect of that. But I hope that during this conversation you were able to see some of the other practices that are part of the trust-based approach get reflected in that. And so if you're interested in learning more about trust-based philanthropy, there's a website that is trustbasedphilanthropy.org, O-R-G. And you can also check out our website, rsclark.org, if you're interested in reading more about it as well. So thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you in the future.